taught you how to learn. Who's ready to learn? So that's a little better. That's a little better. Oh, I'll take it. You want to be a front-end developer? Are you aware that that's what you're kind of signed up for here? That's what we're doing in this class? Okay, good. That doesn't immediately make you want to leave? Cool. So what the heck is a front-end developer? The heck's the front end? Yeah, right? Front end, back end. That's what we're doing. Yeah? No, okay. Let's get some more help from Google Images. That's all very humorous and all. But really, we learned from Google Images that front-end development is all about making flat, pastel-colored things for desktops, laptops, and coffee mugs. And sometimes really cool front-end developers have like icons and logos floating around their devices. That's what we're going to do. Let's take a closer look at some of those logos. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. What do these three things have in common? To be more specific, what do they have in common with each other that they don't have in common with these? And no, well, those on the left are front-end languages, and those on the right are back-end languages is not the answer I'm looking for. What makes the technologies listed on the left work on the front end where the others do not? Yes, sir, Todd.
Is the left one more scripting language than the other?
Not necessarily. Some people would call, I would say PHP and Ruby or maybe probably even Python are kind of scripting languages. Yeah. Yeah, Jay?
Is it that those are the languages browsers can interpret?
Yes, more logos. These are web browsers. And they know just what to do with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. They don't know what the cuss to do with Ruby, Python, .NET, and Java. So one possible definition of the front end is that it consists of anything that web browsers can interpret without any outside help. If you want a more technical definition, the front end refers to things that run on the client, while back end refers to things that run on the server. Since we're doing web stuff in here, the client is the web browser. So that's pretty good. It's a pretty good definition. Okay, I know, right? Slow down there, Grandpa. What's this World Wide Web you're talking about? We only know about the Snapchats and the Yik Yaks, Rip. What's this web business? Sounds like something for the elderly, like people in their 30s. Gross. What if I told you that your beloved Snapchat runs on that very same infrastructure we call the World Wide Web? Right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how this so-called World Wide Web works. And pretty soon, you'll know just as much as a stock photo model or this guy who thought his Palm Pilot bulky cell phone and 45-pound CRT displays would look cool much longer than they did. And who also thought his hair would last a little longer than it did. But anyway, the web. When you visit a website, you type a URL or search term into your browser, right? That gets sent as a request from your computer to that big cloud we call the internet. Specifically, a little corner of the internet we call the web. Eventually, it reaches a server, which then does heaven knows what. It may just grab a file from storage, or it may run an entire application written in Ruby or Java or .NET or something else. Yeah.
So any of those other languages would be something that could run maybe on a server?
Right. Run inside the question mark there. And do heaven knows what. We don't really need to concern ourselves with that at the moment. It does something, and when it's done, it sends back a response. And that response could be almost anything like a zip file or an error page or something, but most of the time, it's one of the handful of things that your browser can read without any additional software. Primarily, HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. So again, the server might just, you sent a request for index.html. It says, oh, okay, that file's right here. I'm just going to pick that up, send it right on back to you as is. Or it might say, a Okay, now I need to launch an entire application, run a bunch of stuff, and the output of that program just happens to be HTML. So I'm going to send that back, and we never need to know that all that happened. But sooner or later, it's probably going to send us some HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, or a cat photo. And that's pretty much all your web browser understands. It could be video or audio or something, but if your web page autoplays that crap, then you are basically summoning the devil, like our friend Spock here. Your guess is as good as mine. But it's probably HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or Lil Bub. And only one of those things is a programming language. No, Lil Bub isn't a programming language. It's JavaScript, your new best friend. So front-end development is building all the stuff that gets sent in the response. All the stuff that the web browser will interpret and display, including, yes, dear old JavaScript. So you want to learn more about JavaScript? Yeah. Why? I have it on good authority that JavaScript totally sucks. Did a Google search. Over 2 million results for JavaScript sucks. And look down here. Casey What's-His-Face there is a master programmer, and he doesn't mince words. Why do people hate it? Because it sucks. Silly question, right? Sucks so much there are 2 million pages devoted to its suckitude. So why use it? Reason number one, you don't have a choice. It's the only real programming language that these bozos understand. If you want to do front-end programming on the web, JavaScript is still the only game in town. You could write Elm or TypeScript or Dart or CoffeeScript or something like that, but only because they ultimately get turned into JavaScript. But there's another reason to learn JavaScript. It's actually pretty good now. Little secret. These 2 million results, they're from last year. Now, we're down to 1.5 million. Furthermore, all of the top 6 results from last year were actually making serious arguments that JavaScript sucked. But look at these. Result number 1 is from whydoesitsuck.com, a site where everything sucks. If that's the first result for your thing sucking, then maybe it doesn't suck so bad because it's not actually someone super opinionated. It's just a grumpy website. And even they hedge in their title there by mentioning JavaScript's bright future. A terrible language with a bright future. Actually a pretty fair description of JavaScript. Number 2. Your language sucks. This is a wiki page that lists what sucks about every single programming language you can think of. So the top 2 results are from sites that could easily be the top 2 results for any language. So maybe there's nothing so particularly bad about JavaScript. The next one says, learning JavaScript in 2017 sucks, and this is awesome. So it's just learning JavaScript that sucks. And anyway, that's a good thing, really. People complain that it's hard to learn JavaScript now because it's improving so rapidly that there are a ton of frameworks that are constantly changing. But it's a nice problem to have. The author of the next post is actually a huge proponent of learning JavaScript. The word sucks appears twice in the post, once saying that it's possible that your local job market sucks, and once saying that a lot of JavaScript training sucks. Never says JavaScript sucks. Just that some JavaScript training sucks. But he's never been to extern boot camp, so, you know. The next post says that if you hate JavaScript, it's due to ignorance. Number 6 is from Reddit, so let's not take that too seriously. But nearly all the comments on that link are saying that the article is a load of this emoji. Yep. And as the comment that's exited here says, OMG, I don't understand JavaScript, therefore it sucks, which is actually a good point. Yeah, a lot of programmers really hate JavaScript, but in many cases it really is because they don't take time to actually learn it. They're just mad that it isn't language X, whatever they're familiar with. And granted, there were some unfortunate decisions made early on in JavaScript's history that we still have to live with. And it says something that one of the most popular books on JavaScript is called JavaScript, the Good Parts. And it's not a very thick book. But a lot of people just don't like it because it's not the language they're used to. For example, JavaScript is generally a semicolons and curly braces language. And we've all seen those before. C on the left, Java on the right. JavaScript looks kind of like those. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually work anything like those. And if you've been writing JavaScript as long as I have, then you remember a time when it was truly miserable to work with. Miles is one of the other guys at Fretless, and this was his first tweet. Last year, Twitter released a little thing where you could look up your very first tweet. This was his, loving my job at hating JavaScript. But that was 9 years ago, when hating JavaScript was actually pretty reasonable. And I think even he would admit that he hated it in large part because JavaScript isn't Ruby. Anybody know Ruby? Okay, JavaScript is not Ruby. It like super isn't Ruby. And that made Miles mad. All right, so now that we've talked trash about it for the last 10 minutes, now who wants to learn JavaScript? All right, Jacob raised his hand right away. All right, I like your attitude. It's improving. Sure, there were over 2 million pages saying it sucked a year ago, but I got over 9 million results for Star Wars sucks, so maybe don't listen to the internet. So how did we get here? Come with me on a magical journey to 1989. The Berlin Wall came down, Nintendo released the Game Boy, Batman and Indiana Jones ruled the box office, and that was the last time anyone made an Indiana Jones movie. Yes, it was. Shut up. Stop laughing. Heck, I still had hair. And at the CERN Particle Physics Laboratory, future home of the Large Hadron Collider, this guy, Tim Berners-Lee, created the World Wide Web, and with it, the HTTP protocol and HTML. He created it for sharing scientific documents in hypertext, the HT in HTML. What the heck's hypertext? Yes. Which information what? I'm sorry? So it's markup. So you're basically saying different chunks of the document have different meanings, basically. That's the markup in HTML, basically. The hypertext portion specifically refers to linking from one document to another. And that was sort of the difference. There were other hypertext languages. There was nothing quite like HTML yet. And the fact that you could link from one document to another was very valuable. And that's still basically what the web is today. Only those linked documents can contain a lot more than just text. But in the beginning, there was only hypertext. Fast forward to 1991, when they made the last Terminator movie that anyone would ever make. Yes, it was. Shut up. I still had hair. Anybody know what game I'm playing here? Is it up there in the upper right? Anybody? Bonus points. Super Mario Brothers 3. That's right. Very good. Bonus points for Rick. But anyway, in 1991, good old Tim made his creation available to the world with a humble news group post. He launched it with a line mode browser that ran on pretty much anything, as well as a browser with a graphical interface and a built-in WYSIWYG editor. You know what a WYSIWYG editor is? What you see is what you get. Thank you, Porter. So, in other words, as you authored it, you would see exactly what it would look like when rendered in the browser. That browser was called World Wide Web, without the spaces. Later renamed Nexus because, well. And it was written in Objective-C and ran on NextStep, the operating system for Next workstations, which are the brainchild of this turtleneck-wearing cusser who had been fired from Apple. But Next computers were really friggin' expensive and not all that widely used. So it wasn't really time for the web to catch fire just yet. So in 1992, when I suddenly had long blonde hair, this guy told Tim he was thinking of writing a web browser for the X Windows system, which would allow it to run on a lot more Unix machines. And Tim was like, good idea. So this guy made a new browser called Viola, which you've never heard of. But yes, It added exciting new features such as tables, embedding web pages in other web pages, a scripting language to add interactivity to pages, a syntax for style sheets. All in all, a huge leap forward, but it still only ran on Unix, so nobody used it. Fast forward to 1993, by which point I was the single most awkward organism on the planet, and the Legal Information Institute at Cornell had made the first website about law. And lawyers were like, it's a Unix system. I know this. No, just kidding. They were like, lol, what? So this guy at the Institute was like, JK, I made a browser for Windows. And the lawyers were like, hype. And this new browser was called... That's right, Cello. Get it? Viola, cello, cello. Yes, Cello, the first web browser for Windows 3.1. This changed everything. Everything. Hey, web browser, step forward if you're historically relevant. Not so fast, Cello. Sorry. But meanwhile, at the NCSA, the National Center for Supercomputing Applications at the University of Illinois, birthplace of HAL 9000 in fiction, these guys, who were students at the time, developed a web browser called No, good guess. Mosaic! That's right. Now, Mosaic was a legitimately big deal. Like Viola, it was a graphical browser for Unix. Unlike Viola, it was very quickly ported to other operating systems, including both Windows and Macintosh. And it was relatively easy to install and use. And that was crucial, as there were more people interested in using the web than ever before. In some respects, the evolution of the web actually took some steps backwards because Mosaic's the one that caught on instead of Viola. No more style sheets. It just introduced a bunch of proprietary elements for formatting. No more cool scripting language. I don't even know what that language was called, and I have no idea what its syntax looks like, because Mosaic didn't support it, and that's the browser that everyone started using. Mosaic just added a bunch of new HTML elements like center, BR, B, U, HR, and image, which doesn't do what Celine said. It doesn't tell you anything about this content. It just tells you how to make it appear, and that's gross. That's a gross thing to put in your markup. So anyway, this was just in time for 1994, when my nerdy friends and I still had hair. Those other three jerks still do. And the information superhighway was all over the news. Anderson Cooper told us all about it on Channel 1. Who watched Channel 1 in high school? One guy, two guys. Okay, cool. Yeah, Anderson Cooper was on it back in the day. And Lisa Ling. And it was time for people to start figuring out how to make money with it. Hey, remember the NCSA, where Mosaic was developed? Well, Spyglass was a for-profit spin-off of the NCSA, whose sole purpose was to commercialize technologies developed at the University of Illinois. So they began work on a commercial version of Mosaic. At the same time, however, Mosaic's original author, this guy again, started a company, taking most of the Mosaic team with him. He called it Mosaic Communications until the NCSA called and was like, the Mosaic name's ours, buddy. So they gave their new version a code name, suggesting that their new browser was the Mosaic Killer. 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 The Mozilla. Hey, Uncle Dave, I've actually heard of that. Yes. Mark and his friends adopted Mozilla as their mascot. But the browser itself ended up being called... what? Netscape. Netscape Navigator was released in October of 1994, implementing a ton of new features and very quickly rendering all other browsers irrelevant. So irrelevant that developers started inspecting the user agent string that gets sent with a request. Remember the diagram? We have our laptop. Oh, cuss. We're still back. I mean, Kristen Bell's fine and all, but that's not what we're supposed to be looking at anymore. Apple TV, why do you hate me? What was I talking about? Oh, yeah. So in a request, you remember the diagram? Apple TV, I swear. It has to do with Keynote specifically. It really doesn't like displaying slideshows sometime. But, so you remember the diagram, right? Oh my gosh. You remember the diagram? Laptop over here, server over here. We send the request. So that request contains not just the address that you asked for, but also some information about the machine you're making the request from and the browser or user agent that you used to do it. So browsers all have a particular user agent string that they send with a request. This is the worst it's ever done. That is meant to identify the browser you're using. So since Mozilla was so common and supported so many brand new features that other browsers didn't at the time, what people ended up doing, the folks who worked on the question mark on the right side of the screen on the server side, they started sniffing for that and making sure it was Mozilla before they decided they were going to actually send the stuff back. They weren't just going to let it not work. They were going to just fail the whole thing and not even send you the requested resource if you weren't using Mozilla. This was the user agent string that Mozilla sent. Spyglass, meanwhile, was licensing their version of Mozilla, as this was developed at Netscape, right, by the folks who wrote Mosaic originally. But U of I, which owned the rights, licensed their version to who? Not Paul Rudd, though he looked exactly the same in 1994 as he does now. Microsoft! Oh, cuss. Player 3 has entered the game. That's right. Microsoft put a team of 6 to work enhancing Spyglass Mosaic and giving it that Microsoft flavor. Yes, Bill Gates can jump over a chair. Which brings us to 1995, when my hair reached its maximum strength, and it looks like I did a cover shoot for Young Republicans Quarterly or something that I've since forgotten about. Turtleneck Guy's other company made a movie about toys. Alanis Morissette was ticked off about one thing or another, and Bill Gates and his start menu were masters of the universe. So he and his pals at Microsoft, or some German industrial band, whatever those people on the right are, were ready to show off their fork of Mosaic to the world. You know it as... Everybody now? A miserable pile of garbage called Internet Explorer. That's right. Available in the Microsoft Plus companion for Windows 95. Now, IE at this point was pretty much just Mosaic dressed up like Windows 95. But the Netscape folks had been busy adding loads of new features. Internet Explorer didn't even support tables in the first release. They didn't even have that blue E icon yet. They just labeled it the Internet. And seriously, forget what you know about Internet Explorer 11 or Edge. The first 2 releases of IE had no redeeming qualities whatsoever. They were garbage. But everyone just used the browser that was on the floppy that their ISP provided anyway, which was virtually always Netscape. Guess what the user agent string that Internet Explorer sent along with its requests looked like? That's right. It reported itself as Mozilla, with the truth in parentheses, so it wouldn't get ignored when folks were sniffing the user agent string. Examining the user agent string is a terrible way to decide whether the user can handle your fancy features. Use feature detection, not browser detection, because guess what? When something gets updated and does support those things, you'll have to change your code, and that's terrible, and you probably won't change your code. There's still stuff floating around from the mid-90s on the web, which means that to this day, every stupid browser does this. They all call themselves Mozilla because of the original version of Netscape, and then just put a bunch of complicated things in parentheses just in case you're sniffing for one of the others. Yes, this one calls itself Mozilla, Apple WebKit, KHTML, Gecko, Chrome, Safari. Guess what this actually is? This is the user agent string for Edge. It calls itself everything. Terrible way to figure out whether a browser can handle what you're doing. Yeah, I know. You were promised JavaScript. We're getting there. Just bear with me. Grandpa's telling a story. All right, so we're in 1995, right? When Generation X was the absolute worst? Yeah, so don't feel too bad. They do it every single time. Look at this. 20-something. Laid back, late blooming, or just lost. See, they say it every time. Are music and movies killing America's soul? We're killing America's soul, guys. Ben Stiller, Winona Ryder, and Ethan Hawke are killing America's soul. But now it's your turn, so have at it. We don't have any soul left anyway at this point, I think. Well, anyway, that was also the year that the web became widely available to mere mortals, and the commercial web was a very real thing. Amazon and Yahoo first appeared. CNET launched with a yellow sidebar that every other site on the web decided they needed to copy. Seriously, you can't imagine how influential that stupid yellow sidebar was. I say that like I didn't make like 20 sites with that yellow sidebar. They even made a movie about hackers in 1995. Boot up or shut up. Oh, man, so edgy, you guys. Oh, online this fall. This is definitely the result of some coke-addled studio execs being like, what are the kids in today? They're into the onlines. Let's make a movie about the onlines. Say boot up or shut up. They like to tell people to shut up. They're kids. We know what we're doing. Yeah, anyway, 1995. It was all over the place, which meant that it was time to make people afraid of it. Who will think of the children? There are a lot of Time magazine covers in this slideshow. It's good to know that 20 years later, you can still count on Time for super relevant, hard-hitting news, like 15 awesome ideas for how to eat chia seeds. But anyway, back to the days when they were throwing cyber in front of everything. Web developers, and suddenly that was almost a real job, were asking how to add interactivity to their pages. I mean, hypertext was neat and all, and there were new tricks like tiled background images and animated GIFs, which were clearly a fad and have no place on today's internet. But web monkeys wanted to add interactivity beyond hyperlinks. The answer came in the form of plugins like Java Applets, QuickTime VR, and Macromedia Shockwave. Incredibly, Shockwave is still being maintained by Adobe. And even more incredibly, the Space Jam website is still online. So we had interactive content, even games, right in the web browser. But interactivity via plugins was still a pretty poor experience. The plugins had to be installed, they were a security risk, they were painfully slow, and they couldn't actually interact with any real HTML elements on the page. Well, fortunately, a team of scientists at Netscape were hard at work on a scripting language that would run directly in the browser. Okay, they weren't scientists. Okay, it was one dude, and he spent a whole 10 days on it. What was it? You guessed it. Mocha! Yeah, that's the name his boss suggested. Remember this guy? He really, really wanted to remind people of that other hot new platform that was named after coffee. But a few months later, in September of 95, they came up with a better name. And finally, we had LiveScript. Okay, that name didn't stick either. And in December, Netscape worked out a deal with Sun, which had created the trendiest new platform in town, Java. And thanks to this trademark licensing agreement, which confuses people to this day, Netscape could call their new language JavaScript, despite having only the most superficial of similarities to Java. In any case, JavaScript now existed and could be used far and wide, at least by people who were using the latest version of Netscape and who had JavaScript enabled in their preferences. But JavaScript had arrived. And because the name JavaScript wasn't confusing enough, when Microsoft reversed engineered it and added it to Internet Explorer, they called it JScript. With me so far? Well, over the next year or so, an organization called ECMA, that's the European Country Music Association. That can't be right. No. The European Chamber Music Academy. No, okay, seriously. It's the European Cylinder Manufacturers Association. No? Don't believe me? Okay, just kidding. It's Étude de Conception de Machine Automatique. No? No. Okay, this is getting silly. It's obviously the Electronic Collar Manufacturers Association. Okay. The East Coast Music Association. Canadian music, East Coast style. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Oh, okay. It's really a standards body called the European Computer Manufacturers Association, or ECMA, and over the next couple of years, they worked on standardizing JavaScript. And they called it ECMAScript. So for the last 20 years, ECMAScript has been the official standard of which JavaScript is the primary implementation. When we talk about the standard, it's ECMAScript, or ES sometimes. And when we talk about the language or the implementation, it's JavaScript. So now that we've got our names straight, what could JavaScript actually do? HTML could define the content on a web page and its basic presentation, but JavaScript could dictate actual behavior. You could do real programming with it. You could even use JavaScript to generate additional HTML. You could put a calculator on a web page. This is still online. You could make images change by hovering your mouse over them. Bonus points if you had no idea what they linked to until after you hovered. It's a terrible way to do it. Terrible way to do it. This is not online anymore. I may have found this buried on an external hard drive. I don't know. I don't know why I have that hard drive. It fell off a truck, guys. I have nothing to do with it. I totally didn't make that. If you're a bank with a ridiculous skeuomorphic website design that looks like an ATM, I can't imagine who would design something so tasteless in the late 90s. Then you could offer not just a calculator, but a mortgage calculator. Yeah, sorry, folks. This one isn't online anymore either. It's archived deep within an external hard drive where it can't hurt anyone. But besides calculators and the ever-popular mouse over image, one of the handiest uses of JavaScript was to validate form data before users submitted it. It was and is a great way to give people instant feedback without a round trip to the server. Does it save us from having to validate again on the server? Heck, fire no. Do not trust user input. They could have JavaScript turned off. There could be an error. They could have formed the request outside of the browser and completely bypassed your client-side checks. Yeah, don't think it eliminates the need. It's just a handy thing for convenience. Anyway, nevertheless, client-side validation was great. But as with any new technology, there were those who would use JavaScript for the forces of evil. Yes, with JavaScript, the pop-up ad was born. Gee, thanks, JavaScript. Yes, everything was terrible. The web was becoming a nightmare, and not just because of pop-up ads, but because an increasingly large number of sites only worked in one browser on one platform. In those days, Netscape and Internet Explorer, which were the only relevant browsers, didn't just compete on user interface features. They each added their own non-standard HTML elements and other features. IE had Marquee. Whee! Netscape had Blink, which is a crime against humanity. Our lives were enriched. Competition had fostered such innovation. No, it was terrible. And both of them had significant market share and had developed wildly different object models. IE had document.all. Netscape had document.layers. So if a site did anything so much as add a pull-down menu with JavaScript, you probably had to write every line of code twice. Nothing worked the same way. Welcome to the first browser war. If you were cool, you put nifty little buttons on your site to let people know what browser to download. And aside from just different APIs for JavaScript, each browser had major features that were just plain absent in the other. And once Internet Explorer 4.0 was bundled with Windows, it quickly became the single most widely used browser. But at least Spyglass was getting paid, right? Since it was based on Mosaic? Yeah, just kidding. Since Microsoft bundled it with Windows for free, they didn't have to pay royalties. Okay, so they did get sued, and they settled for a measly $8 million. But anyway, Internet Explorer began to dominate, and it introduced its own features, such as ActiveX. ActiveX allowed native compiled Windows code to be included in web pages. That obviously opened up a lot of possibilities as long as you were willing to ignore every non-Windows user, which a lot of businesses were perfectly willing to do. The web was starting to become just another delivery mechanism for Windows code. And thanks to the fact that Outlook Express, also included in every copy of Windows in those days, used the Internet Explorer engine to display messages, email could run native Windows code. What could go wrong? Lots of crap went wrong, and computer worms did billions of dollars in damage. And sometimes just previewing a message, you didn't even have to open it. You just had to click on the subject line, was enough to wreck everything. What were we talking about? Yeah, ActiveX. So, Why did companies use it since it broke the internet and was catastrophically insecure? Well, ActiveX did offer some enticing behavior, including one really neat thing that would eventually catch on and be adopted by other browsers, albeit in a pure JavaScript form. It was called XML HTTP request, often shortened to XHR. Anybody heard of it? It made its debut in Outlook Web Access with Microsoft Exchange Server 2000, and it allowed a web page to get additional data from the server after the page loaded without refreshing the entire page. Despite the name, though, data was not limited to XML. It really had nothing to do with XML. It was just a mechanism for asynchronous requests. You may have heard of it by a different name. In 2005, a guy named Jesse James Garrett at Adaptive Path wrote a blog post describing a new pattern for developing web pages using XHR, and he called it, what? Asynchronous requests, adding more data after the page is loaded without refreshing the entire thing. Ajax. Anybody heard of Ajax? Okay, a few people, kind of. Not the cleaning stuff, like for cleaning your bathroom, right? Okay. But in those days, we still had to deal with wildly different syntax for this and even basic operations that dealt with the contents of a page. Using JavaScript in combination with HTML and CSS was called for a time, and we fast-forwarded a few years when CSS was at least kind of supported, and we called it DHTML. There were libraries that managed to work in all the major browsers at the time. Then, as now, supporting earlier versions of Internet Explorer was the hardest. Microsoft was finally talking about adopting standards in 2005, but old versions hung around for a painfully long time. Netscape usage had thankfully dipped below 0.5%. And Netscape's successor of sorts, Firefox, was designed from scratch to implement standards, and it was becoming popular. Still, those DHTML libraries were kind of necessary if you wanted people to actually use your stuff, and they were awful because they were huge. In order to take all your code and translate it into what both major object models could understand, the user had to download a pretty gosh darn big library. Thankfully, 2006 brought several new JavaScript libraries that handled cross-platform compatibility in a much more pleasant way, even Ajax. New challengers have arisen since, and they all do their best to implement standards and to keep themselves up to date. They even have nice built-in tools for developing JavaScript. HTML5 offers new APIs that we can use with JavaScript to do some new things, as well as to do some old things faster. And JavaScript got a major overhaul with ECMAScript 2015, aka ES6, and has continued to improve since then. And you lucky cussers, we're not even going to mess with ES5 or older in this course. We're going to do ES6 all the time, or newer. And we have about 1 million libraries and full-blown frameworks that let us build fancy JavaScript apps. Old versions of Internet Explorer continue to haunt us, as there are still a shocking number of computers running Windows XP even. And IE8, released 7 years ago, was the last version to support XP. And those who never updated past Windows XP Service Pack 1 for one reason or another are stuck with IE7. IE has earned a bad enough rap that Microsoft dropped the name and now calls their browser Edge. But all the modern browsers are pretty okay for our purposes. We'll be using Google Chrome in this class because Seth and I are most familiar with its developer tools, and we really, really want to drill into your heads that you should use the developer tools because they're awesome. But the projects we build ought to work in the latest version of any of the big four browsers. No one knows for sure what the future holds, but the future of front-end development looks pretty bright. It's taken a while to get here, but it's a pretty exciting time to be creating things for the web, and JavaScript has never been better. Are you with me? Yes. Woo! All right, thanks. It's more like it.